The morning sunlight spilled softly through the window of a small city cafe, where the sound of clinking cups and low chatter filled the air. It was another busy day, and the aroma of fresh coffee and baked bread wrapped around the room like a warm blanket. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved quickly between tables, balancing plates with practiced care. Her name was Lila, and though she smiled politely at every customer, her mind was often far away, lost in a world of music only she could hear. Lila had been working at the cafe for almost 2 years. It wasn't what she dreamed of doing, but it paid the bills and helped her take care of her sick mother. Her days started early and ended late, yet she never complained. The job was tiring. The customers could be demanding, but she carried herself with quiet grace. She had learned that sometimes the kindest people wear the most tired smiles. Every night, after closing the cafe and walking home through the dimly lit streets, she would unlock the door to her tiny apartment. Inside, there wasn't much. Just a bed, a small table, and an old upright piano pushed against the wall. The paint on it was chipped and a few keys were slightly off tune, but it was her most precious thing in the world. It had belonged to her grandmother, who taught her how to play when she was only 6 years old. The moment her fingers touched the keys, something inside her changed. The heaviness of the day faded and the world became quiet again. Music was her escape, her secret language. It was where she felt alive. She didn't play for fame or money. She played because it made her heart breathe again after long, difficult days. Sometimes she would record her melodies on an old phone, keeping them hidden like tiny treasures. There was one particular tune she played often, a piece she'd written herself when her mother first got sick. It was slow and gentle, like a lullaby for the weary. The notes carried sadness and hope together, and whenever she played it, tears would form in her eyes without her realizing. She dreamed that one day she might play it on a real stage, in front of people who would truly listen, but for now that dream seemed far away. Lila had once been accepted into a music school when she was younger. It had felt like a miracle at the time, but soon after, her mother's health worsened, and the medical bills piled up. There was no choice but to give up her place and start working. Every time she saw a piano, she felt both love and pain. Love because it reminded her who she was, and pain because it reminded her what she had lost. Still, she carried on. Her coworkers at the cafe often noticed how calm she remained, even when things got busy. "You never lose your temper," one of them said once. Lila just smiled and replied softly, "There's no point in shouting at life. It never shouts back." That evening, as the cafe filled up for the dinner rush, a group of businessmen entered. They wore expensive suits and spoke loudly, laughing in a way that drew attention. Among them was a man everyone in the city seemed to know, a rich investor who owned half the buildings on the block. People said he had made his fortune through clever deals and hard bargains. Some admired him, others feared him. Lila had seen him once before, on the cover of a magazine at a newspaper stand. His expression was confident, maybe even proud, but there was something in his eyes that seemed distant, like a man who had forgotten what peace looked like. When he sat down, he barely looked at the menu. Instead, he gave quick, sharp instructions to his companions and the staff. Lila went over to take his order, notebook in hand. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you tonight?" she asked politely. He didn't look up right away. "Just black coffee." "Strong," he said. His tone was clipped, cold. She nodded, writing it down. But as she turned to leave, one of his friends made a small joke about how the cafe wasn't as classy as the places they usually went to. The man chuckled, then added, "Well, I suppose it fits. The help here looks like they came straight from music school dropout auditions." The group laughed. Lila froze for a moment, but quickly forced a small smile and walked away. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Still, his words stung. He couldn't have known, of course, that she had once dreamed of music school. But somehow the remark felt personal, almost cruel. As she made his coffee behind the counter, her hands trembled slightly. Her coworker noticed and asked if she was all right, but she just nodded. When she carried the cup back to the table, she made sure to steady her hands. "Your coffee, sir," she said softly. He glanced at her, then took the cup without a word. For a moment their eyes met, his cold and distant, hers tired but kind. Then he looked away, already focused on his phone again. The rest of the evening went on quietly. Lila continued serving tables, clearing plates, and refilling glasses, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, she couldn't stop hearing his words. They echoed in her mind long after he left. Later that night, after cleaning up and locking the cafe, she walked home under the flickering streetlights. The city was still busy. Cars honking, people laughing, music drifting from open windows. But her steps were slow. She thought about how easily people judged others by their jobs, never knowing the stories behind them. When she reached her apartment, she kicked off her shoes, sat at her piano, and closed her eyes. The first few notes she played were soft, uncertain. Then her hands began to move faster, her emotions pouring out through every key. The music filled the small room, echoing off the walls like the sound of her heart breaking and healing at once. In that moment, she didn't care who she was or where she worked. All that mattered was the sound, pure, honest, and alive. If anyone could have heard her play then, they would have known that beneath the quiet, humble waitress lived a true artist. As the final note faded, Lila let out a deep breath and smiled faintly. She didn't realize it, but that night would be the start of something extraordinary. The next time she would see that same millionaire, their worlds would collide in a way neither of them could have imagined. But for now, she was just a girl sitting by an old piano, playing her heart out to the empty room, believing that someday, somehow, her music would be heard. The following days went by in their usual rhythm. The morning rush, the lunchtime crowd, the endless plates and orders. Life continued, quiet but steady. Yet something inside Lila had changed. She began to notice how many people like her were carrying hidden stories. The elderly man who came every morning and sat alone with his tea, always staring at the rain. The young couple who argued softly but still held hands. The delivery boy who hummed while wiping sweat from his brow. Everyone, she realized, had their own kind of music inside them. Some just never got the chance to play it. Sometimes, when the cafe was empty between shifts, she would softly hum while wiping the tables. The owner didn't mind. In fact, he once told her that customers seemed calmer when she was around. What he didn't know was that every hum, every tune was a small piece of her heart being set free. Then one afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, a notice was pinned to the cafe's bulletin board. It was about an upcoming charity event, a private dinner hosted by none other than the same millionaire who had mocked her. The cafe had been chosen to cater for the night, and there would even be live music. The other workers were excited, but Lila felt uneasy. She told herself it didn't matter, that she would just do her job and keep her distance. But somewhere deep down, a strange feeling lingered, something between fear and fate. That night she played her piano again, longer than usual. Her fingers danced over the keys and she imagined a stage, a crowd, and lights brighter than the sun. She imagined people listening, really listening, as if her music could speak for every silent dreamer in the world. When she finally went to bed, she whispered to herself, maybe someday. And though she didn't know it yet, someday was closer than she thought. The next week arrived with the same quiet rhythm of early mornings and long hours. The cafe was alive with the smell of roasted coffee beans and the soft hum of conversations. Lila moved between tables, her apron tied neatly around her waist, greeting customers with that gentle smile she always wore. To anyone watching, she looked like just another waitress, polite, hardworking, and calm. But deep inside, she carried a world of emotions that no one around her could see. The memory of that rich man's mocking words still sat somewhere in the back of her mind. She had told herself not to care, that people like him didn't understand what it meant to struggle. Still, she couldn't completely shake it off. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way he had looked at her, like she was invisible, like her dreams didn't matter. It reminded her of every door that had closed on her. Every time life had whispered, "Not for you." That morning, as she was cleaning the counter, her manager came rushing in, waving a small piece of paper excitedly. "Everyone, big news," he said, almost out of breath. The staff stopped what they were doing to listen. "We've been hired to host a private dinner this weekend for a very important guest. A few big names will be attending, so everything has to be perfect. This could put our cafe on the map." The workers clapped and cheered, but Lila's heart skipped a beat when she heard the name of the man who booked it, the same millionaire who had mocked her. She froze for a moment, forcing a smile to hide her surprise. She didn't want anyone to see her discomfort. The manager continued, He's paying a lot for this event. I want the place spotless, the food on point, and the service professional. We'll even have a small live piano set up in the corner. He asked for background music to make it feel more elegant. A piano. The word echoed in Lila's mind like a faint note that refused to fade. The cafe had an old piano sitting near the window, mostly for decoration. Hardly anyone played it. Its keys were slightly worn, but it still produced a warm sound when touched gently. Every time she passed by it, she felt an invisible pull toward it. But she never dared to play when customers were around. Later that day, when her shift ended and the cafe was quiet, Lila stayed behind to help clean up. Her co-workers were chatting about the upcoming event, what they'd wear, what kind of guests would come. When the last person left, she sat down on the small stool by the piano. She let her fingers rest on the keys just for a second. The sound that came out was soft and uneven. It had been tuned years ago, but to her ears it was still beautiful. She began to play a familiar tune, one she'd written herself months ago. The notes floated through the empty cafe, echoing off the walls. She closed her eyes and imagined the faces of people listening, feeling what she felt, even if only for a moment. When she finished, she let out a deep breath, unaware that the manager had been standing near the doorway. "Watching quietly, you play?" he asked. Startled, she turned around, blushing a little. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," he waved his hand. No, that was actually quite nice. "You never mentioned you could play," she smiled shyly. "It's just something I do at home. It helps me relax after work." He nodded, thinking for a moment. "Well, we still haven't confirmed the pianist for the dinner. The one I booked hasn't answered my calls in 2 days. Maybe." He stopped mid-sentence as if the idea sounded too strange. Lila tilted her head. "Maybe what?" He shrugged. "Maybe you could play that night. It would save me the trouble of finding someone else, and you seem good enough." Her heart skipped. "Me at that event?" "I don't think," he interrupted with a small laugh. "Don't worry. It's just background music. You don't have to perform on stage or anything. Just something calm and soft. You'd still do your regular shift, of course. But if the piano spot stays empty, it'll look unprofessional." Lila hesitated. The thought of playing in front of people, especially in front of him, filled her with fear and excitement at the same time. She wanted to say no to avoid embarrassment, but something inside her whispered, "Maybe this is your chance." "I can try," she said quietly. The manager smiled. "Good, let's plan on it then." That night, Lila barely slept. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in all directions. What if she made a mistake while playing? What if they laughed at her? But then another thought crept in. What if, just for once, someone truly heard her? What if her music could speak louder than her words ever could? The next few days passed quickly. Everyone at the cafe was preparing for the big night, cleaning every corner, polishing glasses, rearranging tables. The decorations were simple but elegant, with golden lights and fresh flowers on every table. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. On the day of the event, Lila arrived early. She wore a crisp uniform and tied her hair neatly. Her hands trembled slightly as she set plates on the tables. The piano sat quietly in the corner, waiting. She kept glancing at it, her heart beating faster each time. By evening, expensive cars began pulling up outside. Guests entered in fine clothes, laughing and greeting one another. The millionaire walked in last, his presence commanding the room. He looked around with that same air of confidence, his voice echoing as he gave directions to his assistants. He didn't recognize Lila at first, and she was thankful for that. As the night went on, the cafe glowed with chatter and music from soft speakers. Lila moved between tables, serving wine and food, listening to conversations filled with business deals and travel stories. She couldn't help but notice how different their world felt from hers. Their words floated like bubbles, light, careless, untouched by the weight of ordinary life. Then, halfway through the evening, the manager walked up to her. "Lila, it's time. The guests want some live music now. The pianist I called earlier didn't show up, so it's all on you." Her heart raced. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron and walked slowly toward the piano. The guests hardly noticed her at first. The millionaire, sitting with his business partners, glanced in her direction with mild curiosity. When he saw her sit down, his eyebrows rose slightly. A small mocking smile appeared on his lips. Lila felt his eyes on her, and for a second she almost stood up and walked away. But then she remembered her mother's words. When life makes you feel small, play louder. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The sound was shaky at first, soft and hesitant. A few people turned to look. Then she began to play a melody, and slow, full of emotion. The notes started to flow naturally, like a story she'd been waiting her whole life to tell. The chatter in the room began to fade, replaced by the quiet beauty of her music. She played not for them but for herself, for every sleepless night, every tear, every moment she had doubted her worth. The sound filled the cafe like warm sunlight. People stopped eating. A few whispered to one another, surprised by the unexpected grace coming from the waitress behind the piano. Across the room, the millionaire leaned back in his chair, his expression changing slowly. The arrogance in his eyes softened. Something about the music touched a memory he thought he had buried. He looked down, his jaw tightening. Lila didn't notice. Her eyes were closed, her fingers dancing across the keys, painting emotions words could never describe. By the time she reached the final note, the cafe had fallen completely silent. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a soft round of applause began. It grew louder until everyone was clapping, even the millionaire who had tears quietly forming in his eyes. She stood up, her face flushed, unsure what to do. She gave a small nod, her hands trembling. The moment felt unreal, like a dream she didn't want to wake from. The rest of the night went by in a blur. The guests continued their dinner, but the mood had changed. The laughter was softer, the conversations warmer. Something in that music had shifted the air in the room. As the event ended and the guests began leaving, Lila helped clean up. She was stacking plates when a deep voice spoke behind her. "You play beautifully." She turned around and saw him in the same man who once mocked her. But his tone now was different. His expression was softer, almost regretful. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure what else to say. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I said something cruel the last time I was here. I was wrong." Lila didn't know how to respond. She simply smiled faintly. "It's all right. Sometimes people don't see the whole story." He nodded again as if her words meant more than she realized. Then he left, leaving behind a large tip on the table. When everyone was gone, Lila sat back down at the piano. She ran her fingers across the keys one last time and smiled to herself. The night had changed something, not just for him but for her too. For the first time in a long while she felt seen. And deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. The next morning came quietly, with sunlight creeping through the blinds of Lila's small apartment. She woke up later than usual, her body still tired from the long night before. For a few moments she stayed still, replaying everything that had happened. The applause, the kind words, and even that unexpected moment when the rich man, someone who had once humiliated her, had looked at her not with arrogance, but with something close to respect. It almost felt like a dream. She turned her head toward the piano, which stood in the corner as it always did. The sunlight fell across the keys, making them shine faintly. Her fingers itched to play again, but she didn't. Instead, she sat quietly, letting the memory of last night sink in. It wasn't just about the applause. It was the way people had listened, really listened. For the first time, she felt that her music had reached someone's heart. And that thought filled her chest with a strange warmth she hadn't felt in years. By the time she reached the cafe that afternoon, everyone was already talking about the event. Her coworkers couldn't stop praising her. "You were incredible," one said. "I didn't even know you could play like that." Another laughed and added, "You should have seen the faces of those rich people there. They were in shock." Lila smiled shyly, brushing it off. "It was nothing. I just got lucky," but inside she felt proud. For once her talent hadn't been hidden in the shadows. It had spoken for itself. The manager, who usually kept a strict business-like tone, called her over later in the day. "You did well last night," he said simply, though the corners of his mouth twitched upward. The client was very happy. "Actually, he left a note for you." "A note?" she repeated, surprised. He handed her a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and elegant. It said, "Your music reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. Thank you for playing from the heart." There was no signature, but she knew who it was from. She read the note twice, then tucked it carefully into her apron pocket. She didn't know why it meant so much to her. Maybe because it felt sincere. Maybe because it showed that her music had touched even someone she had thought was incapable of feeling moved. That evening, when her shift ended, she walked home with a small smile. The streets were quiet, and the city lights reflected in the puddles left from a light rain. As she walked, she thought about how strange life could be, how a single moment could change the way people saw you, or even how you saw yourself. When she got home, she took out her small notebook, the one filled with half-written melodies and scribbled lyric, and began to write. The words came easily, flowing like water. She wrote about hope, forgiveness, and unexpected kindness. The next few days returned to their usual rhythm, though something in the cafe had changed. Customers who had been at the dinner came back, asking about the waitress who played the piano. Some even left notes or small gifts, flowers, chocolates, or words of encouragement. Lila was touched by their kindness, but she kept her humility. She didn't let it get to her head. Then one afternoon, the cafe phone rang. The manager answered and gestured for her to come over. "It's for you," he said with a curious look. She took the phone hesitantly. "Hello?" "Good afternoon," said a calm, familiar voice on the other end. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." She froze for a second. It was him, the millionaire. "Oh, no, not at all," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to thank you again," he continued. "Your music stayed in my mind for days. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was wondering if you'd be interested in something." Lila frowned slightly. "Something?" "I'm organizing another event next weekend," he said. "It's a charity gala. I'd like you to play there, as the main performer, not just background music. I'll make sure you're paid properly for your time." Her breath caught in her throat. "Me, are you sure?" He chuckled softly. "Very sure. I don't make offers I don't mean. You have something special, and I think more people should hear it." Lila didn't know what to say. She had dreamed of performing again for so long, but now that the chance was in front of her, it felt unreal. I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never played for so many people before. I'm just a waitress." "You're not just anything," he replied firmly. "You're an artist. Think about it. You don't have to decide now. I'll send you the details." And with that, he hung up. She stood there for a moment, holding the phone, her heart racing. The manager looked at her curiously. "Who was that?" She smiled faintly. "A customer who believes I can do more." That night she could barely sleep. She sat by the piano for hours, her fingers tracing melodies that floated between excitement and fear. Part of her wanted to say yes and to take the risk to step into the light for once. But another part of her hesitated. What if she failed? What if people laughed? The next morning she found an envelope at the cafe addressed to her. Inside was an invitation with her name printed in elegant script. It listed the event details, date, time, and venue, a grand hall known for hosting famous musicians. There was also a small note, "Trust your music. It already speaks louder than you think." She read the note over and over. Something inside her stirred, a quiet courage she hadn't felt in years. She decided she would do it. The following week became a blur of practice and nerves. After her shifts, she would rush home, sit at the piano, and play until her fingers ached. Her neighbors sometimes stopped by her door just to listen. One old woman told her, "Your music makes the hallway feel alive again." Those words gave her strength. But still, doubt lingered. The night before the event, she sat staring at her hands. "What if I'm not good enough?" she whispered to herself. Her mother, resting on the couch nearby, smiled gently. "Good enough? You've been more than enough since the day you were born. Don't let fear decide for you." Lila looked at her mother, her heart softening. "You think I can really do this?" Her mother nodded slowly. "You already did once. You just have to do it again." The next evening arrived sooner than she expected. The city buzzed with traffic and light as she made her way to the grand hall. The building stood tall and elegant, with chandeliers shining through the glass windows. She felt small standing in front of it, but she took a deep breath and walked inside. Backstage, she could hear the crowd gathering, people dressed in fine clothes, chatting and laughing. She peeked through a curtain and spotted him in the front row, speaking to some guests. He looked different tonight, not just in his appearance, but in his expression. Softer, more human. When her turn came, she walked slowly to the piano at the center of the stage. The lights were bright, and for a moment she couldn't see anything beyond them. Her heart raced so fast she could hear it in her ears. Then she took a breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first few notes trembled, but soon the melody found its rhythm. It was the same tune she had played that night in the cafe, the one that had started it all. But now it was fuller, deeper. It told the story of her journey, of pain and courage, of dreams and second chances. The room fell silent. Every note carried emotion so raw that people could feel it in their bones. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled faintly. The millionaire sat still, his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered in the air like a held breath before fading into silence. Then came the applause, loud, genuine, unstoppable. Lila stood up, her chest rising and falling quickly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled. For the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. After the performance, as people congratulated her and asked for her name, the millionaire approached quietly. "You did it," he said softly. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I was scared." He smiled. "Everyone's scared before they do something great. The difference is you did it anyway." She looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the arrogant man from before, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose and find meaning again. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card. "If you ever want to take your music further, I can help. Not because I pity you, but because you've earned it." Lila took the card but didn't say anything right away. She didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She was done hiding. Later that night, when she returned home, she sat by her piano once again. The city outside was quiet, but her heart was full. She touched the keys softly and whispered, "Maybe this is where everything begins." And as her fingers danced across the keys, the room filled with music, gentle, hopeful, alive. The sound of a girl who had finally begun to believe in herself. The morning after the charity gala felt unreal. The city was just waking up, sunlight creeping between buildings, but Lila was still wide awake. She hadn't slept all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the echo of applause, saw the faces of the people standing to clap, and felt the warmth of that moment when her music had filled the grand hall. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone struggling to survive, but as a musician. Her small apartment felt different that morning. The same old piano sat by the window, but now it looked almost magical, as if it too had heard the cheers and carried them home. She poured herself some tea and sat by it, letting her fingers drift lazily across the keys. The sound was gentle and light like a whisper of happiness. Her phone buzzed with messages. Her co-workers had seen clips from the event posted online. "You're famous now," one message read. Another said, "You were amazing, everyone's talking about you." She smiled, not because she believed she was famous, but because people were finally hearing the part of her she had always kept hidden. As the morning light brightened, there was a knock on her door. It was her mother, wrapped in a warm shawl, holding a newspaper. "Look," she said, her voice trembling a little. On the front page of the local section was a picture of Lila at the piano, her head slightly bowed, fingers mid-motion, light shining over her like a spotlight. The headline read, "The Waitress Who Touched Hearts with Her Music." Lila stared at it in disbelief. "I can't believe this," she whispered. Her mother smiled proudly. "You worked for this moment even when no one saw it coming." That afternoon, Lila returned to the cafe. Everyone greeted her with excitement. The manager, who usually stayed serious and practical, gave her a rare grin. "Looks like you've made this place famous too," he said. "People keep calling to ask if the pianist from the charity event still works here." She laughed softly. "I guess I do." But deep down, she knew something was changing. She could feel it. Life was shifting like a melody moving toward a new chorus. Around lunchtime, the cafe door opened and in walked the millionaire. His presence was quieter than before. There was no arrogance in the way he carried himself, just calm confidence. When he saw her, he gave a small nod, and for the first time, his smile felt genuine. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded, removing her apron and sitting at the table across from him. "I wanted to thank you again for last night," he said. "You brought something into that room that no money could buy. I saw people moved in a way I haven't seen in years." She looked down, a bit flustered. "That means a lot, but I just played what I felt." And that's what makes it powerful, he said quietly. You don't play to impress. You play to connect. That's rare. He reached into his briefcase and handed her a small folder. Inside were a few papers and a card. This is the contact of a friend of mine who runs a small recording studio. He helps young musicians get started. I think you should meet him. No strings attached. Lila stared at the papers, unsure what to say. I don't know. I've never even been in a real studio. Then maybe it's time you walk into one, he replied gently. I'm not doing this as charity. I'm doing it because you have something real, and I'd regret it if I didn't help you share it. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. I'll think about it. He nodded, stood up, and added, one more thing. Don't let fear talk louder than your music. Then he left. For the rest of the day, Lila's mind was somewhere else. The sound of cups clinking and orders being shouted faded into the background. She kept thinking about the studio, imagining what it would be like to record her own songs. It was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, she went home and sat at her piano, the studio card resting beside her. She played quietly for a long time, every note carrying her confusion and excitement. She remembered every small step that had led her here, the long nights of practice, the spilled coffees, the moments of doubt. And now suddenly a door had opened. The next morning, she made her decision. She called the number on the card. A friendly voice answered, belonging to a man named Tom, who ran the small recording studio downtown. I've heard about you, he said warmly. Everyone's talking about the pianist from the charity gala. When can you come by? She scheduled a visit for the following afternoon. The studio was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. When she stepped inside, the smell of coffee and the faint hum of instruments filled the air. Walls were covered with old records and photos of musicians. Tom greeted her with a wide smile. So this is the girl who silenced a whole room with her music, he said with a chuckle. I've got to admit, I was curious, she blushed. I don't know if it was that dramatic. He waved a hand. Let's find out. Come on, sit down. Play something for me. Lila sat at the piano, her palms slightly sweaty. She took a deep breath and began to play the same melody she had played at the gala, slow and emotional, every note speaking from her heart. The room fell silent except for the sound of the keys. When she finished, Tom nodded thoughtfully. You've got something special, he said after a moment. It's not just talent. It's honesty. You don't fake emotion when you play. You feel it, and that's rare. He explained that he could help her record a few songs, maybe even release them online. She could start small and no contracts, no pressure. Just your music out there in the world, he said. Lila agreed nervously, not knowing what to expect, and the next few weeks became a whirlwind. Between shifts at the cafe, she spent her evenings in the studio. She recorded her original pieces, songs inspired by her life, her mother, her struggles, and her hope. Sometimes she stayed so late that the city outside had already fallen asleep. Each recording felt like a part of her soul being set free. Tom helped polish the sound but never changed her music's heart. People will feel this, he told her. Trust me. When her first song was finally uploaded online, she didn't expect much. She thought maybe a few people would listen. Maybe some would like it. But by the next morning, her phone was flooded with messages. The video had gone viral. Comments poured in. People from all over the world saying her music made them cry, that it reminded them of something beautiful they'd forgotten. She sat staring at her screen, speechless. Her heart raced, not with fear this time, but with overwhelming joy. For the first time, her music had reached beyond the small world she knew. At the cafe that day, customers kept congratulating her. Some even asked for autographs, which made her laugh in disbelief. The manager teased, "Guess I'll have to start calling you our resident celebrity." But fame wasn't what filled her heart. It was the knowledge that her music had touched people, that what she played in the quiet of her small apartment could move strangers she'd never meet. That evening, as she was about to leave, she found a letter waiting for her at the counter. It was from the Millionaire again. You've done what few people ever do. You've turned pain into something beautiful. I hope you keep going. The world needs more of that. If you ever need support, my door is always open. Lila folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she knew she wasn't the same girl who used to hide behind the counter. Weeks passed, and her songs continued to grow in popularity. Invitations came for small performances, interviews, and collaborations. It was all new, all uncertain, but she handled it with quiet grace. Through it all, she still worked at the cafe part-time, greeting customers with the same kindness she always had. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk by the cafe piano, the one that had started everything, and run her fingers over its worn keys. She'd smile, remembering how nervous she had been that first night. Her mother's health slowly improved and their home felt lighter, filled with music and laughter. One evening, her mother said softly, "You see what happens when you don't give up?" Lila nodded, eyes shining. "I almost did, but something told me to play one more time." And that one moment had changed everything. As the city outside glowed with lights, she sat down at her piano and began to play a new song, one that carried hope, gratitude, and quiet strength. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Somewhere in another part of the city, the millionaire sat by his window, listening to her music playing on the radio. He closed his eyes, letting the sound fill the room. He smiled faintly, realizing that her music had not only changed her life, it had changed his too. And as the final note drifted through the air, both of them in their own worlds felt the same thing, that sometimes a single melody has the power to heal everything it touches. The weeks that followed were like a dream that Lila was afraid to wake up from. Her songs had gone far beyond what she had imagined. What started as a small recording in a quiet studio had turned into something that people across the country were listening to. Music blogs wrote about her emotional playing, newspapers called her the pianist with a story, and people online kept sharing clips of her performances with words like soulful and real. Still, she didn't let it get to her head. Every morning she walked to the cafe just like before. She greeted her co-workers, wiped tables, and smiled at customers. But inside she felt a quiet shift, not pride but peace. She no longer felt invisible. The people who had once looked past her now looked at her with warmth and curiosity. Even the regulars who used to ignore her now asked, "When's your next song coming out?" Her manager, who always cared more about schedules than stories, seemed almost proud. "You've brought so much attention here," he said one day with a grin. "We're getting more customers because they hope to hear you play." Sometimes she'd sit at the piano after her shift, just to play softly for a few minutes. People would gather near the tables, pretending not to watch, but their eyes always stayed on her. The air would grow still, the smell of coffee fading into the background, and for a few moments it felt like the world paused. One afternoon, she got a call from Tom, the man who ran the recording studio. His voice carried excitement. "I just got an offer from a music label," he said. "They're interested in meeting you. They heard your music online and want to talk about a possible album." Lila froze. "An album? Are you sure?" "Positive," he said. "They were moved by your story and your sound. I think you should meet them," she agreed, though nervousness fluttered inside her chest. The idea of sitting in front of music executives felt intimidating. She had no fancy degree, no formal training, just her heart and a piano. But something inside her told her that this was the next step she needed to take. The meeting was scheduled a few days later at a sleek office building in the city. When she walked in, the glass walls and shiny floors made her feel small for a moment. She held her bag tightly, trying not to look out of place. Tom met her in the lobby and gave her a reassuring smile. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's what they liked about you in the first place." Inside the conference room sat two people, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a kind smile, and a man who looked like he'd been in the business for decades. They asked her questions about her music, her inspirations, and how she started. Lila answered honestly, telling them about her childhood piano, about her late nights working and practicing, about the charity event that changed everything. When they asked her to play something, she hesitated for a second but then nodded. She sat at the small upright piano in the corner of the room and began to play one of her original pieces. The sound filled the space softly, every note trembling with emotion. When she finished, the woman smiled warmly. "You have something rare," she said. "You don't perform to show off. You perform to speak, and people can hear that." They discussed ideas for a debut album, something simple, authentic, centered on the piano and her story. "We want people to feel what you felt when you played that night at the gala," the man said. When Lila left the building, her heart was pounding with excitement. She wasn't signed yet, but they were interested. She could almost see her dream forming right in front of her. A real album with her name on it. That night she went home and told her mother everything. Her mother listened with tears in her eyes. "You see, life has a way of rewarding patience," she said softly. "You never gave up." Lila hugged her tightly. "I wanted to so many times," she whispered. "But something always pulled me back to the piano." Days turned into weeks as she worked with Tom and the label on shaping the album. They recorded new pieces, soft melodies mixed with stories of struggle and hope. Every time she sat at the piano, she poured her memories into the keys. It wasn't just music to her. It was her life retold through sound. Sometimes she doubted herself. What if people don't like it? She'd ask Tom. He'd shake his head and say, "They'll feel it, and that's what matters. Your job isn't to impress us, it's to move people." Recording wasn't easy. Some days she spent hours repeating a single piece trying to get the tone just right. But she didn't mind. She loved every second of it. The smell of the studio, the quiet hum of the piano, the feeling that she was building something lasting. Meanwhile, the millionaire who had once mocked her kept a quiet eye on her progress. He didn't reach out often, but every now and then she'd receive a short note or a bouquet of flowers with a message like, "Keep shining," or "Don't forget where it started." She never forgot. In fact, she often thought about that night, how humiliation had turned into opportunity, and how kindness had followed afterward. When her album was finally finished, the label arranged a small launch event. It wasn't a grand concert, just an intimate evening with a live audience, a few cameras, and the soft glow of lights around a grand piano. Lila wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but her presence was calm and confident. Before she went on stage, she stood backstage, closing her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she felt a familiar hand on her shoulder. It was Tom. "You've done this 1,000 times," he said quietly. "Now let the world see who you are." She nodded and stepped onto the stage. The crowd went silent as she sat down. Her heart beat fast, but when her fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. She played the opening piece, the same one from the charity event. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat, gentle but powerful. The audience listened, unmoving. By the time she reached the final note, a deep silence filled the room, the kind that said more than applause ever could. Then the clapping began, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the hall. When she looked up, she saw tears in a few people's eyes. And among the faces in the crowd, she spotted the millionaire. He was sitting quietly near the back, clapping with a smile that carried no pride, only admiration. After the performance, he came up to her. "You've come a long way," he said. "I'm glad I was wrong about you." She smiled warmly. "I'm glad too. Sometimes being underestimated is the best motivation." He laughed softly and said, "You've reminded me that talent isn't always dressed in luxury. Sometimes it's wearing an apron and dreaming quietly." Her album went on to do far better than anyone expected. It wasn't a mainstream pop success. It was something deeper. People connected with the honesty in her playing. Messages poured in from strangers saying her music helped them through heartbreak, loneliness, and tough days. Some said they listened to her songs to find peace before bed. Others said her melodies gave them courage. One evening, months after the launch, Lila sat alone in the cafe after closing hours. The lights were dim, the chairs stacked, and the world outside was quiet. She walked to the piano in the corner, the same one that had started everything. Running her hand over the keys, she smiled. She sat down and began to play softly, not for an audience this time, but for herself. Her music drifted out the open window, blending with the sounds of the city, footsteps, laughter, the distant hum of cars. She thought about her journey, the rejection, the laughter, the struggle, and how it had all led her here. Her mother's laughter echoed in her mind, and she felt tears well up. She whispered to herself, it was worth it. The next morning, as she walked through the city streets, she passed a small music shop. In the display window, she saw something that made her stop. There, on a stand, was her album, the cover showing her sitting at a piano, her name written simply beneath it. For a moment, she just stared, smiling through the quiet disbelief. A little girl stood nearby looking at the same album. She tugged at her father's sleeve and said, "Dad, that's her. The piano lady from the video. The father smiled, nodding. Yes, she's the one. Lila turned to the child and smiled. Do you play piano? The girl nodded shyly. I'm learning. Lila bent down and said softly, then never stop. Even if people laugh, even if it's hard. Music will always find a way to speak for you. The little girl smiled, her eyes shining. Lila walked away, feeling her heart full. That evening, she went home and opened her window. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. She sat at her piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys. And as she began to play, she realized something. Her journey wasn't just about proving herself or finding fame. It was about reminding others that dreams don't disappear just because life gets difficult. Sometimes, they wait quietly until the right moment, when one melody can change everything. The morning sun poured gently into Lila's small apartment, casting soft light on the piano that had carried her through everything. It had been a few months since her album release, and her life had slowly settled into something new. Not perfect, but peaceful. Her music had given her opportunities she never dreamed of, but more than that, it had given her freedom. She no longer had to rush between shifts at the cafe and late-night practices. Now her days began with music. She'd make herself tea, open the window to let the breeze in, and play whatever her heart wanted. Sometimes it was a joyful tune, sometimes a soft one that carried a hint of sadness. Every sound told a story of where she had been and how far she had come. The cafe still held a special place in her heart. Even though she didn't work there anymore, she often visited. The manager would grin and say, "Our favorite pianist returns," and the regulars would wave at her like she was part of the family. Some new customers even asked for photos, which still made her blush. But despite her quiet success, Lila remained humble. She often told people, "I'm just someone who never stopped playing." She didn't see herself as a star. She just saw herself as someone who finally got a chance to share her voice. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. It was from the local art foundation, the same organization that had hosted the charity gala where everything began. They invited her to perform again, but this time not as a last-minute replacement or a waitress filling in. This time they wanted her as the main performer. For a long moment, she just stared at the letter, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. She remembered that night vividly, the nervousness, the fear, the laughter that had turned into silence when she began to play. That night had changed everything, and now they wanted her back. She accepted the invitation, though her hands trembled slightly as she wrote her reply. In the days leading up to the performance, she practiced with deep focus. She wanted this performance to mean something. She wanted to tell her story through music, not with words, but with every note. The people who had once mocked her would now hear how she had turned pain into beauty. The night of the event arrived faster than she expected. The grand hall was lit with soft golden lights, and people filled the seats dressed in elegant clothes. Lila stood backstage, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath and looked around. The same piano stood in the center of the stage, polished and glowing under the lights. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering how small and uncertain she had felt the first time she sat there. Now she felt different, not larger than life, but grounded, strong, and thankful. When her name was announced, the room erupted with applause. She walked out slowly, smiling gently as she bowed. The crowd quieted, and for a brief moment the hall felt still. Then she sat down at the piano, took one deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes flowed like a story being retold, soft, emotional, and full of life. She didn't just play to impress anyone. She played to remember everything she had lived through. The nights she cried in silence, the laughter she found again, the people who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Her fingers danced gracefully, and the melody built higher and higher, until it felt like the music was lifting everyone in the room. When she reached the final note, she held it for just a second longer than usual, as if she didn't want the moment to end. Then the hall burst into applause, louder and longer than before. People stood cheering and clapping. Some even shouted her name. She smiled, bowing her head humbly, her heart pounding with gratitude. After the performance, people gathered around her, offering congratulations. Reporters asked questions, photographers took pictures. But amid all the excitement, she noticed one familiar face near the back of the room. It was the millionaire who had once laughed at her. He waited patiently until the crowd thinned, then walked over with a calm smile. "You've become quite the inspiration," he said softly. Lila smiled back. "I just kept doing what I loved." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've learned something from you. Money can open doors, but heart is what makes people walk through them." She looked at him, sensing the sincerity in his words. "I think we both learned something," she said. He smiled, shook her hand, and said quietly, "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, felt like closure. The same man who once mocked her now saw her for who she truly was. She didn't need revenge or recognition, only respect, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, her career grew naturally. Invitations came for concerts, interviews, and collaborations, but she chose carefully. She didn't want to lose the honesty that made her music special. She turned down some offers that didn't feel right and accepted those that aligned with her heart. She also started teaching music classes for children in her neighborhood. Most of them came from families who couldn't afford formal lessons. She saw herself in their eyes, the same hunger to learn, the same spark of passion. She taught them not just how to play, but how to feel music. One day a little boy asked her, "Do you think I could be like you someday?" Lila smiled warmly. "You can be even better. All you have to do is keep playing no matter what people say." He grinned proudly and she felt her heart swell. That night, she walked home under a soft drizzle. The streetlights reflected on the wet pavement and the city hummed quietly around her. She thought about how her life had changed, how one simple act of courage sitting at that piano years ago had opened a new world for her. At home, she sat at her piano again. The sound of the rain outside mixed beautifully with the gentle notes she played. She didn't play for fame or applause anymore. She played because it was who she was. Music was her way of breathing, her way of saying thank you to life itself. Her mother, now healthier and full of joy, sometimes sat nearby with a book, listening quietly. "You never stop, do you?" she'd tease with a smile. Lila would chuckle. "Not as long as I have something to say." Months later, she received an invitation from a music academy in another city. They wanted her to be a guest performer and speaker, to tell her story to young musicians who were just starting their journeys. At first, she hesitated. Standing on stage and speaking about her past wasn't easy, but then she realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been doubted, laughed at, or told they weren't enough. The day of the event, she walked onto the stage of the Academy auditorium. The room was filled with students, some barely teenagers, holding notebooks and pens, waiting eagerly. She looked at their faces and smiled. "When I was your age," she began softly, "I dreamed of being where I am today. But I didn't have lessons or money or fancy pianos. I just had a second-hand instrument, a job that barely paid the bills, and a dream that refused to die." The students listened silently. "I played in secret for a long time," she continued. "Then one day someone laughed at me when I tried. That could have been the end of it. But something inside me said, 'Play anyway.' And that moment changed everything." She paused, her eyes glistening slightly. "So if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this. Don't wait for someone else to tell you you're good enough. Just start. Play your music, tell your story, even if no one listens at first. The world will hear you when it's meant to." When she finished, the audience rose in applause. Some of the young students had tears in their eyes. A few even came up to her afterward, thanking her for sharing her story. That night, she returned home, feeling fulfilled in a way she hadn't felt before. She realized her journey had come full circle. She had gone from being the quiet waitress who played in the shadows to the woman who inspired others to step into the light. Later that evening, she sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about all the moments that had shaped her, the laughter, the struggle, the unexpected kindness. Every bit of it had been worth it. She turned to her piano one last time that night. As she began to play, the notes floated softly through the air, carrying warmth and peace. The melody was new, yet familiar, like the sound of hope finding its way home. Somewhere, in another part of the city, the millionaire was driving home when her song came on the radio. He turned up the volume, smiling to himself. The same music that had once humbled him now filled his car with calm and reflection. And as the song played, he whispered quietly, "She did it." The world outside continued to move. People rushing, lights flickering, life happening. But inside that small apartment where it had all begun, a woman sat at her piano, creating something timeless. She had started as a waitress, laughed at and overlooked. But she had ended up touching millions of hearts, not through fame, but through honesty, through sound, through the courage to keep going. And that night, as the final note faded into the silence, she smiled to herself, knowing she didn't need anything else. The world had finally heard her voice, and it would never forget the song of the girl who refused to stop playing.